of comfort, send a wave of healing and restoration in all the ways that we need it, and also empower us to also be your hands and feet, people that listen, people that stop along the way, people that can be interrupted when we need and love you. And so hear all the prayers today, those that are spoken aloud, those that still remain in our hearts, we know that you hear them as well. Come to meet us here and follow us in all the places that we go. We pray all these things in Christ's name. Amen. Right. And so we will reflect today on our scripture reading that comes from Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. And I'm going to read that. When Jesus had crossed again into the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and pleaded with him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be made well and live." So he went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his cloak, I will be made well." Immediately her flow of blood stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my cloak?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the synagogue leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they had said, Jesus said to the synagogue leader, "Do not be afraid, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the synagogue leader's house, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl stood up and began to walk. She was about 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Yes, thank you, God.
So we have this image here, which is on the screen, but it's obviously comes from sanctified art as well, but it's called Scene, and I really feel like that hits well on this theme today. Answering the question, where do we hurt? And so last week, as I said, we talked a lot about place, and we talked a lot about where we come from, how places shape us, how assumptions can shape our ideas of one another, what another might be like, how they might speak, what they might believe, all those kinds of things. And the message was to be curious, to ask more questions, to not allow those types of things to get in the way of really getting to know each other. One of the other questions that really aids in our intimacy and our deeper connection with each other is to really understand where each other is hurting. And so our text today illustrates two very different stories that are intimately connected. It's a story within a story, 2-for-1 deal. A parent desperately trying to save his daughter, and a woman desperately trying to save herself. And so we see Jesus is once again on the move. He had just returned from foreign territory on the other side of the lake, and immediately the crowds begin to press in around him. Because by this point, his popularity has skyrocketed, whether it is from admiration or curiosity or suspicion. Everyone wants a front row seat. Everyone wants to see what this man is going to do next. And so I invite you to pay close attention to the people in the story. Jesus is first approached by Jairus, a leader in the synagogue. He is a person of great privilege. He has a name and he holds an office of high importance. He would have been in charge of things like maintaining the building, securing the scrolls, overseeing worship, taking care of general administration. And so he was an insider, someone who inherently belongs, someone who inherently counts, and everyone agrees, everyone knows about it. And so, because of his place of high authority, it may be quite remarkable that such a person would seek out someone like Jesus, someone who's a visiting teacher, someone we don't quite know about yet, someone with no official title exactly, and someone who others really wanted to kill. And so his story demonstrates great faith on the part of someone who is a religious leader, because many other religious leaders oppose Jesus. But Jairus comes to him as a believer in a moment of desperation. And so on the other hand, it really shouldn't be all that remarkable. After all, beneath all of his prestige and status, he still has needs. He still is a father with a dying daughter, a man who is desperate for help. And so we see right away that power and privilege do not keep him from deep fear or pain. And so in this moment, he is like every other person who has sat desperately at the bedside of a loved one. He is like every parent in the world who has felt unable to help their child. And so he throws himself at the feet of Jesus. Perhaps this is one of the only times in his life where he's been able to show this side of himself, this vulnerability. Because he stood in the highest positions and he's kept watch of the temple and he's led worship and he's told everyone else how to live and what to do, and he's interpreted the text for everyone else. And yet when he sees Jesus, he recognizes this opportunity to tap into his inner life, to express what lies below the surface, revealing his deep humanity. He says, "She's only 12 years old. Please help. I have nowhere else to turn." And so without a word, Jesus agrees and begins to follow him. They move quickly and not a minute can be wasted, but the crowds continue to close in around them, making it difficult to pass through. And as they are walking, perhaps people are tugging on Jesus, screaming out their own needs, asking their own theological questions, nearly knocking each other out of the way, trying to get a closer look. And so if it happened today, people would be trying to take selfies with them. They'd be shoving microphones in his face, asking for interviews, trying to catch the moment on Facebook Live, maybe. But there's a lot of people. And these two men are trying to make their way through, and they're in a hurry, and they really don't have time for all of this because this girl doesn't have much time. And then, all of a sudden, Jesus stops. And he says, "Who touched me?" And it's such a strange question to ask when you are fighting your way through a crowd, because everyone is touching him. But there was something different about this particular touch, and Jesus refuses to go on. Some scholars have described this moment as a disruption in the story, but there is nothing about Jesus' response that suggests that he feels annoyed or burdened or interrupted. Jesus is maybe confused, maybe disoriented in this moment, but most of all, he is curious and he stops. Because maybe no one else would have asked or noticed. They were all just trying to get through the day, meet their own needs. But he turns to listen to this particular hurt along the way. And so finally this woman comes forward and she is trembling and afraid. And unlike Jairus, this woman does not have a name. She approaches Jesus in secret. She's not even sure if she wants to be noticed. If she can just touch a piece of his garment, she thinks that that will be enough. We learn that this woman had been sick for 12 years, as long as Jairus' daughter has been alive. She was suffering from a constant flow of blood, some kind of hemorrhage or menstrual irregularity, a condition that scholars have not really been able to nail down exactly. But she is a woman who is bent over. She is a woman who is drained financially. She has already seen all of the doctors. She has endured every kind of treatment, and she has emptied her pockets looking for a cure. And she was exhausted. Her condition likely made her ritually unclean, although we don't know for sure how that played out in this story. But she likely would have been isolated from others because of her condition, and she was hurting. Yet, this woman is also bold in every way. She approaches this man without being invited, and then by pushing through the crowd, she takes the risk of exposing everyone, including Jesus. And so her very presence in the story is disobedient, but she's at her wit's end. Most people at this point would have expected her to give up, but she is like so many other women in history who have stood their ground, maybe fighting for fair wages, fighting to sit in the front of a bus, fighting to be listened to in churches. Yes, this woman is audacious. And who can even blame her? It's been 12 years of pain. Perhaps by this point, people had stopped checking in on her. Perhaps at this point, people stopped calling her. They stopped stopping by the house. Perhaps people stopped asking where it hurts. But Jesus asks, and she has the opportunity then to bring before God her unfiltered story, her painful experience that has long been walked by and ignored. And immediately healing returns to her body. She is commended for her honesty and vulnerability, her trust and ability to name her woundedness and her need. She trusts that Jesus can take it. She trusts that she can come before him with a red face and snot running, and Jesus honors it, even calling her daughter, drawing her into his own family. And so it's such a beautiful story that we might accidentally forget about our friend Jairus from the beginning, who at this point is getting pretty impatient. Because Jesus' time with this woman has provided enough time for his own daughter's condition to worsen. And sure enough, just as Jesus is speaking good news to this woman, bad news arrives that the young girl has died. So Jesus is too late. By the time they finally get to the house, folks are in full mourning and they begin laughing when Jesus suggests that something could be done. And just like the woman's chronic condition, it seems like a lost cause at this point. Folks have already made their mind up about what is possible. Doctors could not keep listening to her ongoing symptoms. People had refused to look at the pain any longer. And people even begin to ask Jairus, why even trouble him anymore? People stopped asking him where it hurts. And even so, after eliminating the noise, Jesus again makes space to listen to the need. He is curious about the hurt, and he is willing to face what others are not. So he touches the dead girl, which also would have been unclean, and raises her to life, and then has the audacity to request that she might have food, signaling that she should be whole in body, mind, and spirit. So I really appreciate the way that one Baptist church summed up this story. That at first glance, there are two stories that could have not been more different. There are two people who have entirely different social positions in society. Jairus is a well-off man with a name and a title. She is a marginalized person who is unnamed. She is rendered a nobody. He is a religious leader. She has likely been cast out. He makes a formal request. She doesn't ask permission. And still, these stories are connected. Both people have pain that others mock or diminish or ignore. Both people trust that Jesus wants to hear what is hurting them. And in both stories, Jesus is willing to bend the rules by touching the unclean, by touching the dead, in order to listen to where the pain is. And so these healing stories are not randomly thrown together or in competition with one another. They are connected. They need each other to be healed in order to truly thrive, just like we do. Like I think about so many justice movements that started, like the women's movement, like Black Lives Matter, like the LGBTQ movement. They all begin with telling people where it hurts and telling people that we need each other to care about our particular histories and pains so that everybody can be free. And so in society, some of us are going to be a little bit more like Jairus and his family, publicly appreciated, well-resourced. Others of us are going to be the unnamed woman just trying to get through the day, just pushing through the crowd. And many of us will be both at different times in our life. But a key point is that whether we have lots of privilege or lots of oppression, we all have hurts, whether those are physical or emotional, spiritual, systemic even. It's easy to think that because somebody is young or educated or because they work for a church or because they whatever, that they do not have hurt. And sometimes when people do share their hurts with us, it's easy to become overwhelmed or impatient when a person's situation just feels too complicated, too controversial, too impossible. You might even wonder what the person did to bring it on themselves. But as we learn in the story, there is always space, always room, always a way out of no way that begins by listening to where the pain is. To stop and get curious about what lies below the surface, behind the I'm doing fine or I'm doing okay. This is how we build empathy and strengthen connection. In social work education, they train us not to ask people what's wrong with you, but rather what happened to you. And so, in light of that, I think maybe Jairus was a little bit uptight and a little bit too heavy-handed sometimes at that synagogue. But doesn't this story give us some insight? Maybe there were times he was in a bad mood. And doesn't the story give us some insight? And maybe the chronically ill woman had stopped talking to people completely. Maybe people thought that she was rude or mute or unable. And doesn't the story give us some insight? The pain was why. And so that makes me think about the other people in the story as well, the people responsible for the laughing, the people diminishing or ignoring the pain of Jairus or this woman. And I wonder what made them do it. Perhaps they had their own pains that they were working through that caused them to hurt someone else. And so I wonder if the story gives us some insight. In my own life, it's been incredibly healing, difficult, but healing, to learn some of the stories of people who I think have really hurt me. I've gotten to this place in my life as I get a little bit older where I look back on some things and I'm more open to hearing about how people grew up, what people have carried in their lives. And so many things end up making sense. Now, this is not always possible, and it certainly does not mean that I need to continue in relationships that are hurtful, that I need to keep being best friends with them. But I can perhaps gain compassion and understanding, to wonder about where it hurts. This is also a spiritual life. Because in this passage, our friends at Sanctified Art Ministries show us that here we find Jesus in the midst of human life, in all of its messiness, in the fears, in the heart of a parent. He is right there among the sweaty bodies of the crowds, the scent of a woman's blood. He is there in the midst of it. But as a church, we often shy away from pain. We believe that we have to come to church with all the right things to say, all the right expressions, the right level of faith. So we might hide behind the singing, and we might hide behind the smile. We might say we are okay. And we might believe that God only wants to hear what is going well or what we're thankful for. And yet this week we are reminded that pain and suffering is not something shameful. And our hurt is certainly not something that makes God run away. Jesus shows by stopping, by being curious, that he is not interrupted when we ask for healing. He is not burdened when we need help. No, God meets us in our bodies, in our gatherings, in the care that we offer for another. And so, as part of our deepening connection, it's important to get curious about the pain that people carry, and even be willing to share our own. It is by witnessing and bearing witness that we begin to see healing. So friends, I've been meaning to ask, where does it hurt? In you, in others, what pains have been silenced, ignored, or unacknowledged? And how can we approach one another with the same willingness to tell the truth? Scripture tells us that by showing what is real, Jesus might just stop. So, as our custom here, we move now into discussion, to which you can respond however you want, but also if you'd like to answer the question, where does it hurt? feel free to do so.
Just thinking old foods. You're sitting here talking about pain, and I'm thinking my back is hurting, my leg is hurting, my knees.
Yeah.
I like the way the story came together about how she's dealt with the habits. Just seeing that there's no difference between us. Just made me realize that we all have something to Christ loves us.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those on Zoom, Judy was just made a joke about the pains that you might feel in your body getting older, but also just the value of the story being able to talk about Jesus honoring the haves and the have-nots, and how we can forget that. Yeah, Alex, and
One of my favorite things to do now is to go to meet my old friends from high school, because during high school, when we were all teenagers, we were all so self-centered and narcissistic, and just thinking about how, oh well, we didn't have as good clothes as the other people, or we weren't as popular, or whatever. All those things, or there was something wrong with our family, and everybody else had a perfect life and everything. And now that we've all been through the wars and stuff, that I realized, wow, I should have been so much more sensitive as a teenager to other people's hurts. I think it's typical for teenagers and younger kids to just simply focus in on what might be wrong or hurting in their own lives. How they live on the wrong side of the tracks, or whatever it is, whatever petty thing. But now I like these people a whole lot more than I ever liked them in high school.
Yeah.
We've all kind of mellowed, and we all understand about hurting and being sensitive to other people's hurts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Allison was just sharing about the reflection that she has now about people that she knew when she was younger, and how at the time she didn't think about people's hurts, but now realizes that it's important to consider, and she has a greater appreciation for folks in light of that.
I think there are a lot of women and girls hurting right now. And a woman in the dog park told me that her 15-year-old said the overturning of Roe, that guns have more rights in this country than girls do. And I just think there's this huge undercurrent of grief and sadness and despair.
Yeah, that's definitely been something that I think has been on a lot of people's minds. Has affected a lot of us in different ways and different levels. So for those on Zoom, Anna's good at projection, but in case you didn't hear, she was mentioning the overturning of Roe, just women, girls who maybe experiencing a lot of fear. And I know for a lot of people who are in places where they're going to be fine and able to access resources, like it triggered a lot of people no matter where they are. And so, I think especially in the light of a story that is about a young girl and about a woman who has suffered medically, it's difficult. And so I think that's a real thing to hold.
It's interesting to also see Jesus situation. And just like give a lecture to all the guy to say, you need to make some reform and the synagogue, and before I go to, he didn't bring any of that out. It was like you said, it was just basic human need of preservation of his daughter. But he didn't judge him either. We're quick to judge the Jewish faith at the time and how all of those Pharisees were so bad to him, but it's not all right. This guy, he really did risk his neck for what we know. He may have been shunned by his circles going out there. But why did you give this guy Jesus, the street cred of bring him into your house?
Yeah. Yeah. Heather was just saying that just the point about how the story kind of humanizes the religious leader. Sometimes we're quick to assume that they were all Pharisees who were angry at him, or just powerful people in general in stories. But the story really reminds us that Jesus didn't judge them either, and that's important. And yeah, I agree. This is one of those stories. You all know this about me. I am sensitive to the person in the story that I feel doesn't get, that doesn't have a name, that is marginalized. And that's kind of where my heart is. And so sometimes stories like this, I'm like, oh, really, God, I gotta preach this. But it's true. And it's important for me to always remember that too, that even when there's one person we always see first in the story, everybody at the end of the day has needs. And so I think it's one of those stories that works on the preacher as well. If you are one of those folks who's like, no, not the powerful people, taking everything away. So yeah, it doesn't work on me too. Yeah. All the same man.
Sometimes the cause of the first is not known. But there's other times when the cause is known to be foods.
Yeah.
And yesterday I spent 2 hours listening to the streaming process pertaining to my own home province in Scotia, where in 1918, during the First World War, blacks came forth to volunteer to serve. And they were told that this was not a war for them. This was a white man's war. But they quickly become servants. They established a battalion number 2, and it was the only one in Canada. And the 600 men volunteered to serve as workers and laborers, chopping wood for use of the soldiers in France and Belgium. And several of them died. And when they came back, they had to resume the positions of second-class citizens. And that hurt pervaded the whole race for a very, very long while. And so it's a long story. I'm not telling it.
Yeah.
But yesterday, there was a great celebration in Nova Scotia. Place of 41 and it was attended by most of the prominent members of the government of Nova Scotia. And Prime Minister Trudeau and his teenage son were there as well. And Trudeau gave a wonderful speech, and it was an apology. An apology of the Nova Scotia, the government of Canada, to the black community. Not only in Canada, but people also came to the United States and the islands, the Caribbean islands, to join this battalion. And but yet, throughout it all, this should not be seen as an end, this apology, but simply a beginning. And everybody cheered every time that was said.
Yeah.
That problem is not been solved.
Yeah.
It was just beginning to heal. And the band-aid was important band-aid on this particular wound. The wound is still hurt. And lots and lots of people listen. I was following the camera to see whether the people recognized the audience.
Wow.
Well, I didn't. My sister was there, and my brother as well. And then there were several cousins. And Lisa sent me the link, told me how to get access to me. And she's an RCMP, and she was texting me from the car. And so we were communicating that way as I looked at it was a tremendous event, a tremendous sorrow and pain. It's a philosophy over a century before, century afterwards. So this story, I think, has its own complexity. Hurting with so much complexity.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Peter was just sharing about a live stream that he saw in which some of the issues in Canada around race and just centuries of oppression and injustice were lifted up, and an apology was offered, although lots of people said that that was only the beginning, that there is a lot of work to do in terms of restoring. But that, just kind of pointing out that sometimes hurt covers entire cultures, entire people groups. And I think that that's also important as we're here and we talk often about social movements even. Like sometimes we, kind of like water them down to just like being trendy or, whatever. But really, I mean, many of them started because people are hurting and wanting to kind of show people where it hurts, how it hurts. So part of this is not just hurt that occurs in a moment, but also hurt that occurs across centuries, across generations, across entire history. So how do we listen to all of those hurts?
The Americans did that also. Black groups totally be just kind of the servants, the medial labor. If you, I know a little Middletown history, go down to the Poplar Square there, how there's the big post there with the eagle on top. Look at the names on the bottom. First three are in alphabetical order. Then the last is Jeremiah Jackson, colored troops. As I remember, he had to serve in a group in New Jersey. I'll have to look that up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Same thing here. Just a lot of, I know that has occurred historically in a lot of ways, but specifically in terms of service, just keeping troops out, observing, or having them serve all the particular roles. How do we listen to the ways that pain echoes through generations? And now we also have research that also affects people biologically as well. That kind of thing can affect people's bodies and genetically gets passed down, those hurts. And so how do we begin to heal little by little thing that can be traced back?
My aunt was a WAC in World War II, WAC, but when she went in, it was WAAC, because it used to be Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. And then the women stood up and said, we're auxiliary nothing. We're not making the block. We are in the Army. We are in the Army.
Yeah.
So then they changed it right away to say, WAC.
Yeah.
Or Women's Army Corps.
Any other thoughts? Well, thank you so much for your reflection and for engaging that. I hope that we can all leave a little bit more encouraged, that we can bring our own hurts to God and to each other, and also to listen for hurts that may have been long silenced or ignored. And so, we move now to our next.
Lives are in the Lord, but God we honor and confess. Why crave we more pure? They feed those things we some flaunt their gold, some trust its power, but what they cherish will decay, and still the ransom for our soul remains a price too great to throughout the land, the shackles of mortality prevent so much that we beyond this age of shame and shame, we glimpse a better destiny.